Also have an office in Denver, but I sit in Atlanta.
All right.
All right. Well, we're going live to the world out there. So I would like to welcome everyone to today's Clean Start Perspective. I am Thomas Hall, and we are supported by SMUD, our regional utility, Chico Start, Fresno State, the WET Center, through the CEC's Innovation Fund, Witten Law, a regional law firm supporting early stage entrepreneurs and helping them scale, along with Moss Adams, a regional accounting firm that supports bookkeeping and services for growing companies. River City Bank, one of the largest banks in our region, supporting clean energy projects. And with that, I'd like to welcome our guest today, Emily Morris, CEO and co-founder of Emrgy. We've had her on before to talk about Emrgy and what she's doing in California. And since we talked to her last, she's had a lot of growth and had a lot of success kind of growing her company through different avenues and building her team. So with that, I would like to welcome Emily to take over and introduce Emrgy for us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that kind introduction and for having me today, Thomas. It's great to be with you and great to be with all of you. I'm excited to talk to you today about Emrgy. I'll certainly start from the beginning for those that may not have heard the first session we did on perspectives, and it's been quite a long time. So I'll introduce you a bit today to who we are here at Emrgy. And I'm also looking forward to taking questions about our growth or our challenges, both from you, Thomas, and from anyone else as well. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully you can see it here. I'm excited to tell you a bit about Emrgy today. Emrgy is a climate tech company that is redeveloping water infrastructure into renewable energy and water stewardship projects. We take open channel water conveyance canals like the one you see here on the screen, and we redevelop them mile by mile, taking something from an aging infrastructure asset that's losing value each year to one that's now generating new economic and environmental value through the production of distributed renewable power, as well as through streamlined water operations and water conservation efforts as well. I started Emrgy in 2016, really with an effort towards commercializing the innovative hydroelectric power technology that you see here. I had been working on this platform in a defense contracting role, originally funded by the U.S. Office of Naval Research, and became really personally inspired by the need for reliable, continuous, affordable power at the distribution grid that water power provides us globally at the transmission level. And so I started the company and spun out the technology toward this end. And I've spent many years now meeting with water districts and irrigators and farmers, understanding their challenges, understanding the value of new energy, new economic revenue generation, and really learning that the story of Emrgy is actually a lot more than just a hydroelectric module. Truly, we see here at Emrgy that water infrastructure is the true nexus of energy and water. Many of you are probably very familiar with the concept of the energy water nexus, that it takes a lot of water to make energy. It takes a lot of energy to complete water operations. Pumping, treating, moving water comprises almost 20% of the total electricity consumption in California. And so being able to bring new energy solutions closer and closer within that infrastructure itself, we believe is a very sustainable approach toward the energy transition and a clean energy future. We work within water conveyance canals like the one you see here. This is actually the Boise project, the New York Canal, part of the Boise project in Idaho that used to be agriculture as far as the eye can see. And now you can see there is quite urban development, new residential, new industrial. There's all kinds of new load demand that's coming on and around water infrastructure. If you take a map of perhaps Metro Phoenix and you overlay data centers with canals, you'll see an almost perfect co-location because obviously, there are a lot of industrial processes, whether it's brewing, whether it's food and beverage, whether it's dairy production, whether it's data centers, they need water for their operations. And getting that water from a canal is obviously has a much more streamlined regulatory process than getting it from a river. And so it's very natural to have access to water as a siting consideration for those. And the landscape of much of our Western US is starting to change, where we're seeing more electricity demanding loads coming in and around what used to be highly agricultural. So as we come in and we ask water districts, could we partner with you to utilize your flowing water to generate clean electricity at no cost to you? We will come in, we'll develop the project, we'll own and operate the project within your waterway, and we'll share in the economic value creation with you. That message resonates really, really strongly with those water districts who are seeing the changes that are happening in the landscape. But often they tell us that, energy is only one small thing that they're faced with. The American Society of Civil Engineers has a list of the investment into American infrastructure and the least invested into American infrastructure. Water is number 2 least invested into infrastructure in this country. And so often when we meet with water districts, they are faced with canals that are falling apart, that are seeping water, that are inefficient, that aren't able to get the water where it needs to go without actually losing a lot of the water along the way. And so often they either ask us if we can encompass some of these upgrades into the project, or if they'll tell us that every dollar of revenue they generate, they're going to put toward other repair projects or resiliency projects. And so at Emrgy, we've actually expanded, just probably since I was on this session before, Thomas, we've expanded the solutions we provide to water districts to include both energy solutions and water conservation and irrigation modernization as well. We do that through a combination of solutions. You can see here, this is one of Emrgy's modules installed in a canal. This one's actually in New Zealand. It's producing power to the grid every day. And we have innovative hardware solutions that go in with the hydro system to generate power. We also have innovative software solutions. We actually use solar inverters. We put a essentially string inverter on every single turbine so that power is clean and conditioned right there at the turbine level. It is ubiquitously compliant with grid standards and very cost effective to interconnect. And then we also provide data out of our systems. They report out the water depth, the water speed really at all times, and help irrigation operators make good decisions about how that water is being used. You'll notice in this picture as well that underneath the turbine and behind the turbine, there's a new lining to the canal. This particular canal was losing 30% of the water they diverted out of the river as it flowed along the canal. And so being able to install an impervious liner actually helped them conserve water, be better stewards of the river, and actually they conserve both water and energy in the canal because it went from a very rough, frictional canal lining to something very smooth. And so Emrgy was able to come in, take the energy grade line that had been increased from conserving that energy in the canal and actually harvest that as usable boosted electric power out of the turbines as well. And so now Emrgy provides both of these solutions to water districts. We do obviously the hydro system. We actually have hybridized a couple of our projects with floating PV in between the turbines. This is a great incremental power boost to the system because we already use solar inverters. So the only added equipment here is just the cost of the panels. And we run it all back through the same cabling. And then we also, of course, bundle that with water conservation and some of the digital and data services as well, where we partner with the water district to actually to bring revenue streams out of the energy that's generated, the renewable energy credits, and the water that's conserved that's now available for aquifer recharge or for sales to those data centers or other water users along the canal. And there's an environmental benefit attached to that called a volumetric water benefit. So all of these things come together to make these projects really valuable, both from the environmental perspective and economic perspective, as this canal previously was only generating revenue from the water sold to the users. This is kind of a technical slide about sort of the building block of the system. It all starts with the water. It starts with the hydro. These systems, you can think of them as a large SUV, sort of physically sized, and each one generates about as much power as a large rooftop. So anywhere, if the water's slow and shallow, it's 5 kilowatts. If the water is a bit deeper and faster, it can be up to 25 kilowatts per turbine. And then we place those in an array to really bring sort of community scale, distributed scale electricity, anywhere from a quarter megawatt up to 5 megawatts or so per interconnect. As I mentioned before, we use smart inverters with the system so that we can provide intelligence every day. And they're very, very simple. We use local labor to maintain, to install, and beyond there. Emrgy has 4 projects today that are grid feeding in the US, and then we also have our project in New Zealand. One of the things we've been doing since I last saw you, Thomas, is we've been going out and developing our partnership model. So these projects you see here, 3 out of these 4, we actually sold the equipment to the water district. It's now their asset to offset their power consumption. Now Emrgy has a partnership model where we sign long-term agreements with water districts. We develop, finance, operate, and maintain and own the hydro system or power system within the canal, and we share in the revenue that's generated with that partner. And so we've signed up water districts that oversee about 9,200 miles of canals across the West. There's 150,000 miles in the West, 17 Western Reclamation states of open channel conveyance canals. And we've signed partnership models with water districts comprising about 9,200 of those miles, and are now starting that build out here in the US. Beyond the US, of course, there's a major global opportunity. We have received a lot of inbound inquiries from countries all over the world. As I mentioned, we already have a system installed in New Zealand, and we've shipped equipment to Italy as well for a project with Enel Green Power, one of the largest global independent power producers. And we're really excited to essentially prove this out here and be able to develop distributed water power and distributed solar with partners all over the world. So very quick and simple overview presentation of Emrgy. And I'd love to tell you a bit more about it, get into the weeds on the technology or the business model or the organizational growth, whatever would be most pertinent to the audience today.
Well, thank you very much. I think that was, a good summary, I guess, of everything you do. We've seen some other companies that have wanted to do kind of, I guess, this micro kind of hydro, and they've had, I wouldn't say as much success as you have had on it. And one thing I kind of got from your presentation, it sounded like you were offering additional benefits beyond just pure power to the water utilities. Was that kind of your initial plan, or is that something that you found that you had to develop in order to sell your product?
It's something we absolutely found organically. As I mentioned, it sort of started with the hydro module. And to be honest, when I first started Emrgy, I thought the best application for this was within water treatment plants. At water treatment plants, you have 24/7, 365 water flow. You have continuous electricity demand. And those two things, of course, lead to a very strong project. Although, over time, actually, it really came from just getting out there and meeting with as many municipalities, as many water districts as I possibly could to really understand what is the best value that Emrgy can bring. How are they viewing this? Because no question, we didn't invent the idea of taking energy out of water and aggregating that power together. There were reasons why it was very difficult to have those business models be successful in the past. And we wanted to make sure that we did this in close coordination with what we call our stakeholders, because obviously these water districts aren't buying anything from us. They're not our customer, but they're the most important stakeholder to the project because they provide the feedstock for the power generation. They provide the site. They provide O&M assistance. And quite frankly, there are very few renewables where there's a physical person turning on and off that renewable feedstock. And in our case here, this is operated water, and making sure that all of the project metrics of success are aligned is absolutely vital. And so, learning that the canals have needed and been in many of which many districts have at least one area that's in disrepair, and being able to see their pain points, see how they are viewing this. They're viewing this as simply some of them view this just as a revenue inflow that helps to pay for the problem over there. And being able to really connect the dots between those, think about how this system can serve them best for many decades to come, really shaped our thinking here. We never dreamed we would be providing canal linings and a lot of the capital infrastructure. But as we dug deeper into it, we saw that adding the lining can boost power production up to 250% out of the systems. And so, it's accretive sort of across the board to solve their problem, generate more revenue and renewable energy out of the system, and everybody wins.
That kind of leads into a question that we had, and I see in the audience, I think really the now I kind of have is, how do you calculate, the ROI or in the payback on the turbine? Because it sounds like it's more than just, selling the electricity. How do you calculate that? What's the kind of payback time and the payback to the, I guess, water district or whoever is purchasing the parts of it?
Yeah, so in our original model, it was a classic equipment sale like that. So there would be a price for the equipment that the water districts would buy. That tended to be in, I would say, from a dollar per watt perspective, a bit higher than solar because you have rotating machinery and water. It has to be very sturdy. Water can be very detrimental to rotating machines. And then essentially the ROI is calculated based on the amount of flow that they have going through the turbine, the number of days that water is flowing, so a total amount of generation, and then the price at which they can monetize that generation. And so, for example, our project in Utah, they purchased the turbines for probably around, this is years ago, probably in the neighborhood of $3 to $4 per watt. And then essentially they are net metering one of their agricultural pumps that's pumping water out of the ground, into the canal. And they're monetizing that in a net metering format of about 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And they calculated their ROI based on their annual water flows and their predicted water flows in the future. Today, we take a very different approach. Today, we're a more traditional renewable energy development type model where we actually design and specify the system based on an economic return hurdle. So essentially, we'll look at a canal like the one you see here, and let's take it on a per mile basis. If you take a mile of canal, how much power can be generated with the hydro versus with the solar or added solar? Does it make sense to include that lining? What is the per acre foot or per cubic foot value of that conserved water? What are the available revenue streams that can bring in? And then ultimately, does that lead to an economically viable and or financeable project. And so the it varies on what the technology suite is that's used in each project based on the site that's there. But essentially, we design the projects, and then we essentially work with our partner related to how much revenue can be generated, how much can we share, and is that project economically viable to go and bring in the capital to build it.
So, you're still an early stage company. Are you guys getting, how close are you guys to profitability?
Well, we're a venture-backed company, so we're really not incentivized to be profitable right now. Everything that we are doing, we're reinvesting into the business. And so, ultimately, we'll continue to be venture-backed as a company, and we will be essentially financing these projects at the project level. The projects absolutely have to be profitable, or else you won't be able to bring in financing to them. But here at the operating team, our goal is to continue to invest, building out, O&M platforms, building out asset management platforms, continuing to expand the pipeline, establishing our global strategy. Those are all things that we will continue to invest in, at least over the coming 2 to 3+ years, as we start to build out this first cohort, a large cohort of EBITDA, cash flowing projects, and which will obviously flow back up to support that growth here at Emrgy. This first cohort, we've signed long-term commercial agreements on about 15 megawatts of projects that can go into construction this year, with the intention to bring those online in early 2026. That will be sort of the first larger, rollout of the projects.
Do you feel comfortable sharing, what the profit margin is on these projects, or?
Yeah, I mean, maybe those in finance might be perked up to hear, I guess, these metrics. But essentially, if you just do what we call drop and go hydro, like what you see here, the canal already has a nice infrastructure. We are not doing any modification to that. We're essentially coming in and placing the turbines in the channel, and that's it. We're not doing any hybridization. Those projects tend to fall in the sort of 12 to 15% unlevered rate of return type of range. If you hybridize the system with floating solar that's moored to the back of each turbine, you're essentially adding very little cost for more generation, depending on where you are. California is a great place to do that. You can bump that up to sort of the 18 to 20% range. And then if you're bringing in the capital improvements related to the water flow, it does increase the cost a lot. Building new canals and canal linings is a very capital intensive effort. Although obviously the value of water in the West is also very exciting. And so with the right partners that can really increase the profitability of the projects, based on the fact that doing those infrastructure improvements makes the power more efficient and higher generating. It can be bundled in federal tax credit monetization, and both the price of the water and the environmental benefit attached to that is something that can really increase the valuability of the projects.
One thing you mentioned there, and I remember you mentioning before, is that you guys have started, I guess you've gotten grants and have started adding solar to these, that you're not just going one single technology, you're somewhat diversifying on that. Could you, share, I guess, the grant, or how you got the grant on that and how that's impacting what you're working on?
Yeah. So, the first time we added solar to a project was really simply just to prove out sort of the technological viability of it. If we had to do, for example, two entirely separate systems, a hydro system and miles of cabling, and a solar system and miles of cabling, it'd be very, very, very difficult to make that pencil. We hypothesize, though, that if we could take our hydro system that already includes ample conduit and cabling in a distributed format along the canal, already includes solar inverters, already includes all the power electronics. If we could add additional wattage to that without a lot of cost, that could be very accretive to the overall system. And so the project here on the left, we commissioned ourselves. This is not grant funded. This is a project that is in partnership with the city of Denver and Denver Water. We added the floating PV to it, and we were successfully able to run all the power through one integrated system back to the grid. The grid doesn't even know what's being generated as hydro versus solar, except you can probably make a good guess at certain times of day or certain times of year. Our system, of course, does separate out inside of our control systems and data collection what's being generated. Then, we sought to look at, okay, how do we do this on a larger scale? So we partnered with a water district in Oregon on a U.S. Bureau of Reclamation funding opportunity to demonstrate and pilot solar on canals. We already had been board approved for sole source hydro with that district. We are exploring many different sites within their district for the distributed hydro. And the district was awarded that grant for solar on canals as well. So now that project's going to be about 1 megawatt, anticipated to be online mid next year, although we are still in the process of contracting related to that federal grant. So timeline is a bit unclear, to be frank, but super excited about that and the ability for Emrgy really to expand our breadth, not just to a hydro tech developer, but really to a sort of full service water infrastructure redeveloper to meet certain goals for both energy and water with water districts.
Yeah, very cool. So you've your company and team has grown a lot, I guess, in the past year and a half since you kind of talked with us. Can you share a little bit about, how you grew your team and the successes that you've had on that? Because last time I talked with you, I guess a couple months ago, you mentioned, that you felt like you got the right people in the right position. Can you share your team building strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it's been probably one of the hardest things that I've faced as an
I
entrepreneur,
think
and
every
probably.
entrepreneur, it's a bigger pain than they realize.
I was going to say, I imagine there's some entrepreneurs on this in the audience that are shaking their head right now. Like, it is so challenging to find key talent that can catalyze the growth where you need it, that can provide different perspectives, but they can have that healthy tension, healthy debate that makes each of us better. It's very difficult to find that within any kind of business. And so, I started Emrgy as a solo founder. Our CTO has been with us for 4 years now, which is a bit of it's a lifetime in startup years, right? Forget dog years. Startup years are like way longer. And that's been amazing to see. And, when I first started Emrgy, take the CTO position, for example, I needed both to build technological credibility because I'm not a hydropower designer or, a fluid mechanics engineer. I needed to build credibility that the technology had technical merit. And we brought in someone who was fairly academic to that end. Being able to demonstrate that these systems are not going to float away downstream. They're not going to chop up, fish that might be swimming in the canal. So, to get water districts comfortable that we know what we're doing, putting this in, to get investors comfortable, we brought in someone fairly academic. But as we started to grow, And we started to put projects out there. We needed to change who we were as a company from something that certainly can work academically, but it needs to work economically too. And so, over time, we brought in a CTO who was previously the CTO of battery storage at GE, who really well understood getting supply chain resources together, taking something from a technology to a product, something that had the kind of manufacturability and cost targets and the forward-looking cost curves that were needed to demonstrate that while we're here today on manufacturing, here's where we can go at an LCOE for global scale. And so it's hard to find that right fit for the business, both hard skills, but then culturally, it's a whole different thing. As a solo founder, I have very strong vision, very strong opinions. I can see where we're going. And, making sure that we have that diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, diversity of culture, but that is at its core sort of based on the same values and able to reach alignment for certain decisions. It's hard, very hard. And we've had certainly some pain along the way. We've had to exit key team members, some for good reasons and some for not as good reasons. But, I feel so blessed to be able to have this team around me that is all racing in the same direction. That it's keeping that pace has been really incredible. But it took a long time and a lot of pain to get there. I don't know what else to say.
So if you had go ahead, Gary.
Well, just reacting to that, because I mean, it is a topic that every startup has to deal with, but it sounds like you had a kiss a lot of frogs strategy. You had to interview a
Yeah,
lot of people, and sometimes they wound up being what you thought they were going to be, and sometimes not.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I've learned over time with that frog strategy is, early on, I used to get such internal strife about making an organizational change. What's going to happen? Are they going to be okay? I used to get a lot of internal strife, and then, seeing so many of the sort of eventual frogs, if you will, sort of turn over and watching where they are today in a place where they're thriving and much better suited. It was like, temporary pain for a ton of relief on both sides, right? When something isn't a great fit, it's not just, it was very one-sided of me to think that they thought things were perfect and I didn't. Once we finally got to the clean break, it felt in almost every case that it was more a relief for everybody than and the whole buildup wasn't really worth it. So I really started to take a much more, much less personal, so to speak, much more just organizational view at what does the business need. Eventually one day maybe that's not me. Maybe one day the business doesn't need me and we're doing the same thing, but eventually it should be a relief when it's the right thing to do.
Excellent. So, what's your next move? I mean, you're doing open canals. There are, and it's for irrigation water and municipal water. There are a few more things that have open canals. You mentioned water treatment plants. What else is out there that gives you more worlds to conquer?
Well, conquering this first world of water conveyance is a huge world that we've really only scratched the surface on. I mean, when you think about the UN Food and Agriculture Organization estimates over 2 million linear miles of canals. That alone is an opportunity that if we are successful in doing even a fraction of those, I will be, proud of the water stewardship and clean energy legacy that this company can have. You're correct. The water treatment application is really strong and quite frankly has the best economic metrics. If you're generating power out of these 24/7, 365, the levelized cost of electricity it drops precipitously. There's very little more competitive than having that type of base load. What we found was that the sales model is just very different. There's 30,000 water treatment plants in the U.S., another 30,000 in Europe, and each one would be a handful of systems that you need a very large sales force for that, and the municipal procurement timelines are long. But no question, through the right distribution channel or partnership, that could be a great opportunity. We've looked at opportunities with industrials. We talked with a large food and beverage manufacturer that has 15 plants in Mexico that are all, putting effluent into the same areas, and being able to have a programmatic approach that is able to outfit these systems or these plants to reduce their carbon footprint is a great application as well. Maybe one day we'll touch the more romantic, water power areas like tidal energy or ocean current or something, or even riverine. But today, the regulatory framework for being able to install this type of system within water conveyance is not only so much more streamlined, but also, as I mentioned about the energy water nexus, it fits together. The supply and the demand fits so well together that I think it makes a lot of sense. But actually, our original fluid mechanics and fluid design is based off of tidal energy. The turbines are already bidirectional, and we are exploring some opportunities in Asia with some industrial clients that have bidirectional flow, and maybe that's something we can dream about from a technology perspective. But I think for now, keeping my blinders on and staying here in this section is, I hope, going to serve us very well in having a large scale build out.
Well, I mean, I appreciate what you're saying about all the opportunity around the world, but how does that amplify your problems on building teams? Because now you're bringing language and cultural differences and distance problems into building teams for all these different locations.
Absolutely. I at least for right now, and we'll see how well this ages, my vision is that the international expansion, it will be done through partnership. There's no one who knows the local problems better than local teams and local developers. That's one reason, for example, we don't send people out to these sites to maintain the hydro equipment. We utilize and partner with the local technicians, actually employed mostly by the water districts to do that, because they know the local challenges better than anyone. I don't pretend to know the local challenges, whether I'm in France or in Singapore, and so or in Guatemala. And so partnering with local teams, having a distribution type of model where those local teams actually perform all the work and we're supplying them equipment from here is likely the right balance of risk and reward. That means we're not involved in the local power generation. We're just supplying equipment. Maybe we're leaving some on the table there, but I think it's probably the most prudent and most sort of respectful to the local ways of doing things.
So what's your exit? You've got to think at some point, you've got something which is financially leverageable. You can package these things up and sell them off as securities. Actually, you can do lots of things with partners and just let them run with it in a more self-contained way. But at some point, it's not only harvesting the power, it's how do you harvest the value that you're creating?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. I think as a company, ultimately, we would look toward partners and teams that can potentially take this a lot bigger than our nimble team. I consider myself often more of a founder than a CEO. I love the hard problems. I love paving the way. I love the pioneering aspect. And, eventually when this is, we're rinsing and repeating and programmatically growing, there probably is someone a lot more better suited for the business than me, and probably a lot better ownership structure for the business than me. And at that point, thinking through what type of exit maximizes value for the people that we serve out in rural areas, the people who have funded us to date, and the people who are here on the team working their butts off every day to make this reality, is something that's super important to me. I think that there's also like some really creative, innovative ways to exit these projects, so to speak. These are assets that are in rural communities. Eventually, I think they should be owned by the rural communities. I think they should be able to have a much bigger piece of the long-term value generated by these projects. I mean, a lot of the local communities have lived there for many generations, and so providing them something that they can continue to invest into, to maintain, and also get value from for generations is something really important to me. And how we think through potentially exiting these projects in that way eventually as well is something that we've noodled around some here, but haven't necessarily gone to market with a strategy on that.
Well, you got an interesting opportunity. You could be the one that's like the warehouse of parts and uh, diagrams, blueprints, helping other people succeed and helping them with value chain problems. So I guess what I'm interpreting from what you're saying is that there could be lots of ways of skinning this cat, and there could be a piece of it that you fall back to, and it's more comfortable because it's something you can get your arms around, but you're serving hundreds of others that want to build these projects. So, good
Absolutely.
creative thinking there. I like that.
So
Thanks.
with that, I have, we're coming up on our time here. Um, what advice would you give to, early stage entrepreneur who's looking at doing projects with a utility, whether it's a water district or an electrical utility, and is, they have a big idea, but they obviously see a lot of mountains that they have to climb. What advice would you give to an entrepreneur like that?
Um, It's a great question. I think we could do a whole session on like lessons in piloting. I mean, some of our early pilot agreements or early, partnership agreements, looking back, trying to create a comprehensive partnership when you are very early stage is almost impossible. So you can't be mad at yourself for it. But a lot of loose ends throughout piloting for sure. I would say that if you're an early stage entrepreneur out there, this is especially working with municipalities, working with communities, working with utilities. There is no such thing as an easy button, and there's no such thing as an overnight success. And a lot of times, it is the long term conviction around the value of what you're doing that is the only thing that's going to carry you through. It's not just perseverance and grit, it's that you have to believe that what you're doing is going to make the difference that makes it worth it in the end. And I think looking at the statistics, I mean, the average time from a startup founding to exit is in the hardware space is like 12 years or longer. And so, I'm 8 years into this. There is no overnight win here, and so I think it's really just to not get discouraged when things aren't more instantly gratifying. That overall, putting in the time and the energy will be worth it. But you gotta be really committed to what you're doing, or else 8 years can feel like a long time, or 12 years can feel like a lifetime.
Well, I think the audience enjoyed that quite a bit. And it's some good optimism there, find something you have a passion in and not something that I guess you're asking yourself why you're putting the energy into it. Um, and with that, I'm gonna wrap us up here. I'm gonna go ahead and share my I guess closing out screen here.
Well, a
And
round of applause to
yeah,
Emily. That was great.
Well,
that
thank
was
you so
excellent.
much for having me.
It was great to have you back. Great to see the growth that you've had, and that was a lot of wisdom that you gave to us today. So thank you very much. Look forward to seeing Emrgy out there doing more things. And I also want to thank our supporters. That's SMUD, Chico Start, Fresno State, Witten Law, Moss Adams, and River City Bank. I also want to encourage people to join our next Clean Tech meetup next week on innovations in regional mobility. Along with, you know what, we're going to be going back and doing a lot of discussions on water, the future of irrigation efficiency, navigating California's water regulations, all in April. And that's brought to you by some of the experts. You know, if you're looking for that, you know, that academic person that Emily mentioned helped her with her start, we're going to be talking with them. So make sure you follow Clean Start and check us out on cleanstart.org to make sure that you stay connected with this. Thank you for attending and look forward to connecting all of you. We'll have an edited version of this up with it by next week. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks,